Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 2020 FutureX Fall Summit. My name is Liz Ragosess, and I'm Director of Programs at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of Jim Rooney and the rest of the team at the Chamber, we are thrilled to be working with the MITX, BEMA, and FutureX communities. For anyone who's joining a FutureX event for the first time, FutureX is a program that unites marketing and media professionals with industry titans in content-rich, knowledge-sharing environments. Our goal is to ensure our community walks away with new intelligence and new connections. Today's event aims to do all of that and more. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for companies to transform their digital engagement strategies. Our speakers today will talk to us about what this new landscape looks like, how consumption trends have changed over the past 7 months, and what agencies and brands should expect in the upcoming 12 to 18 months. Before I introduce today's first session, I want to flag that this event is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page in the coming weeks. I want to encourage you to utilize the chat and Q&A functions during today's conversation on the right-hand side of your screen. And please submit questions throughout the session so that our speakers will do their best to get to as many as they can. And lastly, don't forget that we'll have networking rooms available after the last session from 5 to 5:30. Stick around and meet some of your fellow attendees and speakers. You can find these rooms on the left-hand side of your screen. So with that, I'm excited to pass the virtual mic to Andy Tilden-Jewett of AMP Agency, who will moderate our first session. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I'm so happy to be here today for the FutureX Summit. I personally worked at MITX and got to be a big part of FutureM, so never got to speak at events, so this is as close as I'll get. But excited to be kicking off our first session. So to quickly introduce myself, my name is Andy. I am the VP of Business Development and Marketing at AMP Agency. I'll be moderating today's discussion, have some burning questions. I'm very passionate about the topic myself, and I have the distinct honor of introducing this session's featured speaker. So joining us today is Mike Flanagan. He is the Director of Advanced Platform Solutions for Effective. Mike leads the team for the Northeast and Midwest regions, encompassing all New England markets, New York, and numerous smaller and mid-sized markets. He's been with Effective for 14 years, and he and his team bring Effective's newest data-formed and cross-screen solutions to our markets, with a focus on driving results for their clients and tracking attribution from their advertising. So thank you for joining us, Mike. The virtual floor is now yours.
Thanks very much, Andy, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for giving us the opportunity from Effective to speak and talk about one of my favorite topics as well, the streaming wars. So I'm going to share, just to tee up our conversation, I'm going to share a deck. I promise it's not 97 slides. Hopefully you guys are seeing that now. Do you have that? We've got it. So because it's one of the topics that we talk about, whether we're seeing our friends in real life or virtually, the topic still comes up. What shows are you watching and where the hell do you find them these days? And for those of us in this side of the business, what does it mean to the fragmentation we're experiencing today? What does it mean to our business? So just a couple of slides. We want to make this a conversation. But I just wanted to tee up a couple slides on how we look at the business these days. So starting with something fun, 7 shows here, all kind of on streaming networks. I don't know, you probably can, and a lot of easy ones here to identify which of these shows run on which of these networks. But do you know all 7 of, or can you get 7 for 7? I'll come back to that in a second with the quiz answer, but this is what has been driving the streaming adoption, not just the technology, of course, but the programming. And, I think that most of the time that I've added one of these services personally, it's been to follow one of these shows. And I think that's kind of ongoing as part of these streaming wars. So I want to step back for a second and talk about what TV is today. And we developed this graphic a couple of years ago to describe what is increasingly a complex ecosystem that our clients and all of us are trying to figure out. So if you think about the various layers of content, from broadcast to premium cable to the cable networks that we insert on Effective, 50+ cable networks, to these relatively newer services like Netflix, Hulu, Prime, et cetera, Disney, you've got all this content, right? More content, the golden age of content, as we've kind of described it. And then you consider all the different kind of delivery mechanisms, the ways you can find that content. And someone asked me the other day, what's an MVPD? MVPD is a multi-channel video programming distributor like Xfinity. We are as effective, we're part of the Comcast NBC Universal family. So whether you get your programming through Xfinity or Verizon or DirecTV, or if you're in another market from Spectrum, that's the MVPD world. Subscription video on demand services, like we mentioned before, that are accessed online, ad-supported video on demand services, TV everywhere apps, niche subscription video on demand. So things like Shudder, which goes after a very specific Halloween-y type of content that would be very popular this month, OTT services, and of course you can buy programming on iTunes and Google Play. So this is not meant to be the comprehensive ecosystem of how you can get content, but it's certainly a pretty big collection. And then you add on the devices, right? TV used to just be the one box on the wall. Now it's all these other ways to get content. So we did this mostly to help our clients and ourselves understand all the different ways that you can access programming these days. We're fortunate as part of the Comcast family that we're open to all these ways that people consume content. We're not kind of fighting this tide, we're kind of embracing it, but it certainly complicates things. And what fragmentation does makes it kind of an attention economy. It used to be easy to deliver huge reach and frequency in TV or even digital video when there are fewer sites. Now, we are focused back on that viewer who's in the center of this graphic. We have to go more places, do more things, trust the data to find the target audience across screens. And you might not expect, someone who's part of a cable company to kind of promote this and embrace it, but we look at this is the Nielsen Total Audience Report, and we can continue to see the shift from live TV over to streaming on demand TV. It's almost at 50-50 right now for adults 25-54. And as you would expect, younger age cohorts are even doing more streaming on platforms and PC and mobile. And we understand this is happening to all of us. So certainly seems like streaming is massive, right? But we've also, as part of Effective, put out quarterly viewership reports over the last couple of years. This is the second quarter report when we're in the midst of a lot of quarantining and COVID. And what we saw was that traditional TV, meaning this is based on all the set-top boxes, all the data that we have in our across the country for Effective and Xfinity. TV viewership in the old way, meaning linear TV and video on demand, actually grew from 6 hours and 11 minutes in Q2 of 2019, grew by 15 minutes to almost 6.5 hours. And the big driver of that was the increase in video on demand. So video on demand grew by 15%, and DVR viewing actually went down. So just a little bit of data to kind of inform our discussion. And one more data point, comes from our partner company, sister company, Freewheel, which puts out its quarterly video monetization report. They're partners of ours. They also serve the whole ecosystem. And here you see the huge growth in connected TV impressions. So between connected TV and VOD, 3/4 of the impressions end up running on the big screen. So it is very much a TV environment. But in the first half of this year, connected TV impressions grew by 42%. So that is one more accelerator to the move towards more OTT, more organizations selling OTT, programmatic delivery of video. All these things are kind of coming together. So, just a quick couple data points to ground our conversation. But one thing that we feel is that not all video is created equal. Everything from user-generated content up to professionally produced network content from the likes of Bravo, Discovery, and other nets. So if you look at the real focus these days seems to be on full episode player, 30-minute, 60-minute programs where you have an engaged viewer, and it's kind of replacing the impressions that TV used to kind of provide on its own. So not only is that's a number of sources, Tubi, Pluto, et cetera, as well as in Roku, of course. But what's kind of harder to come by is the authenticated FEP to, you know, a subscriber that is in a device that we can track to and that has a reliable inventory stream. So we look at these two graphics to try to make sense of the world that we live in. So I'll come back to the programming real quickly. And you probably, I hope you got at least 5 or 6 of the 7. These are the big services. So these are the subscription streaming on demand services. Of course, you know, we always think of HBO first as a premium cable channel, but it's moving toward, you know, it's also streamed independently now, and HBO Max will have ad units in it. And some of the, you know, some of these services are ad-free, like Netflix and Prime. Others are hybrids. You know, in Hulu, you know, you can have kind of an ad-free version. You can have ad insertion. Peacock, from our parent company, NBC Universal, has 3 models with almost no ads, a very, you know, a lighter ad load and a kind of a normalized ad load. But there's a lot of experimentation in this space. And I think it's pretty interesting to see how it all plays out. And again, I'll go back to the time that people are spending on Hulu, on Netflix and Prime and all these non-ad insertable channels really mean that we have to work harder to deliver the audience in other ways. So in addition to those subscription kind of premium video on demand sources, there's live streaming. And the one kind of constant here that kind of struck me as I was building up the slide is they all seem to end in a vowel. So Roku, Fubo, Tubi, Zumo, Pluto, and Quibi, which sadly just yesterday, Quibi is shutting down. Their model of short form video didn't really catch hold and probably came at a very tough time amidst the pandemic to launch a new program like that. So just really interesting to see all these different sources. This is what is, these sources are of course contributing to all the connected TV impressions that are out there that can be accessed on exchanges programmatically. They're part of our solution as well. Many of these sources are part of both the X1 experience from Xfinity, as well as the Flex box that we give to those people who only take our high-speed internet. And then just, again, a couple more topics. And I know Andy has some great discussion points we want to talk about, but every day in the trades, you can see what's happening, all these questions, all these concerns. If anything is growing and making money as connected TV impressions were, then somebody will find a way to try to exploit it and use some fraudulent ways to make some money. So that's what we saw that just a few months ago in terms of scammers kind of spoofing what looked like legitimate premium networks, creating the idea of having ad impressions available out on exchanges when they really had nothing to offer. So that, you know, that comes to the connected TV world. And then from a, you know, just a consumer perspective, variety story, we're all buying these subscriptions. We're signing up for these subscriptions. I probably have almost all of them myself, but at what point do you have too many, or do you start to look at the cost benefit of bundling those subscriptions in addition to everything else you have? Just in the last week or so, the announcement came out that Amazon is going to have a streaming access to one playoff game. Hopefully that means as much to us in New England as it typically does, but one wildcard playoff game. So content like that moving over to a streaming service is a big deal. But it's also going to be on Viacom, CBS. And then just within the last week or two as well, the growth of Netflix and Disney Plus kind of slowed a little bit in their most recent subscriptions. And because there are some ad-supported versions popping up. Make no mistake, these are still massive numbers. Netflix has massive numbers, but more options just kind of fragment the market. So a couple of things that we talk about with our clients in this kind of what can be considered a confusing world. And I think it might be worth talking about with this group because you guys live in the space. You know, again, the more things fragment, the more we got to knit the audiences back together. And so this is not our selling point as much as these are the questions we ask our clients to kind of consider. They need to work with people who have first-party data insights to build campaigns. We happen to have a ton of data. The fact is, as cookies tend to lose their appeal, it was something we talked about in the last MITX session that I was at. There was a lot of talk around programmatically what happens with the changes in kind of the diminution of cookies and the need to have more first-party data, more authenticated subscribers. So that's a big thing. I think the data piece is in many ways the coolest piece of what we do. And you deliver to authenticated subscribers, so you worry that you're not wasting impressions anywhere. And then one thing we found, because everybody and their brother is selling OTT these days, whether you're a radio company, a print company, you're just standing up your own organization, everybody has a slice of the pie. That if you think about that grid I showed, that graph I showed at the beginning, that big round circle, what slice of the pie does somebody have? What slice of the pie are they kind of pretending they have, but they don't really have access to it in a good way? So we like to focus on who has direct access to premium inventory. This is kind of a question that came up from more of the agencies and clients that I've been meeting with over the last couple of years. So I originally got it through finally got it through my thick skull. This is pretty important if you have access to the inventory or you're just trying to go out and find the inventory, once you do a program with a client. The environment, of course, brand safety. Is it network programming? We're not discriminating against all these newer ad-supported video on demand services. They're great. They help us reach the cord cutter. That's how people are watching TV these days. So we embrace all of that. But for some brands are very conscious of being in networks that their clients would recognize. Of course, a mix of full episode player programming and short form content. It all comes back to our best customer and our best partner is someone who's really educated in the space, asks good questions, insists on campaign transparency to make sure that they're getting what they think they're getting. Like I said, there's so much competition in this marketplace. Everybody's trying to make the most out of OTT. We get it. We are too. But those are some of the things that we put in front of our clients just to discuss. And that's what, for us, it's take the programming and watch it on every device you can find. Basically, we have the rights for an authenticated way. However people want to watch TV, we're good with that. But again, I hope that wasn't too much of a sales spiel. That certainly was not the intent. It was more just to kind of hopefully get us grounded on all that we see going on in the market, how we try to make sense of it all, and kind of just tee up a conversation about the streaming wars and what we see happening next. So thanks for listening, Andy. Your thoughts or questions? I know you have a few.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do want to, of course, open it up to the audience. If anybody has specific questions, feel free to use the chat feature. I'll kick it off, though, because this is a burning one for me. At AMP, we're full service. So we really strive to have our media teams work in cohesively with not just our strategy teams, but our creative teams. So talking creative, when you're dealing with clients, how do you kind of push the importance of the creative message itself and not just about how we're buying TV?
That's a great point, because I think especially for us, we end up being in that sales negotiation all the time. We're talking about, getting the program, getting your ads up and running, and then too often it's an afterthought. And where we're headed really is more and more addressability. And to tap into addressability, you need to have the right message for the right, part kind of the consumer. A lot of what we'll be bringing to clients in the next couple of years as we move forward with addressability is, hey, here are all these great impressions. Don't just send one message. We can send 6 messages, 8 messages. We can identify from your own data your current customers versus your lookalikes versus people who are lapsed from your customer base. And then to your point, having a robust creative strategy is the only way to really address that. We're not gonna, I think the media world, sometimes there's this idea of honing in on the 50 people who are gonna buy something, in the next 6 hours. And I get that, but whether you're talking all forms of digital, particularly digital video and streaming, you still get the benefit of a lot of reach. So you want to get, reach those clients with your brand building message. Even if that's 50% of the people don't seem to be in market right this moment, there's a message you can have for them. And then there's a different message you can have for those who are closer down the purchase funnel. So by all means, I think it's hugely important and something we're always trying to remind ourselves of as well.
Absolutely. And even beyond where they are in the funnel, we talk about how, just looking at opportunity audience segments and testing into those, TV and the creative can be part of the conversation then, because you can drastically change your message based on exactly who you're talking to. So that's a lot of the conversations that we're definitely having, and it's really exciting. And the other thing I always like to remind clients is, just because we're talking creative, it doesn't necessarily mean a huge production budget. In the same way you can buy so efficiently with advanced TV now, you can make creative pretty efficiently too. And in COVID world, we've learned.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And being efficient and then just targeting those audiences it'll make us all better, make the whole media better. Absolutely.
So another thing I wanted to bring up, and it was one of your last bullet points around reporting. In the idea of reporting, a huge question we always get is around attribution, and where advanced TV and connected TV really fits in that mix now, and how we can actually make it much less complicated than it needs to be. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how we can really measure how effective TV is from an attribution standpoint.
Yeah, no, and I would say if there are two things that our company is most focused on, it's addressability, getting, increasing on addressability, and also on attribution, because we all know in our guts that TV works. And we've also done a white paper recently on the halo effect of how TV in any form, or when I say TV, I mean, the stuff that we do on video on demand, the stuff that we do with streaming, how all of it drives your digital performance better, all your lower funnel metrics. So we're focused on that. We have a solution right now called Instant Impact that actually on your kind of traditional linear TV tracks when your ad runs through ad logs in our system, connects to your website traffic, and within a very short window. We don't take full credit for every website traffic piece of website traffic you get, but it shows us that we can make at least some kind of correlation to your ads are running, you're getting more site traffic, is it hitting certain KPIs that you want, trying to close that loop. And our attribution solutions on linear TV and digital TV basically are coming together more and more, because we feel like it's essential that we prove out the value. But there's a lot of work being done there, and I think it's something that our clients lean forward every time we talk about it, because you want to go back to the client and say, yeah, you invested a lot of money, you got what you expected out of that. I don't know why my watch started talking to me. But I must have hit a button there. But yeah, attribution is kind of key. It's now the data to inform on the front end and the attribution on the back end to continue to optimize.
Absolutely. I think your watch was trying to tell you that eventually you'll be able to watch TV on the watch too, probably.
I'm taking it off so I don't bang into it anymore.
Absolutely. So I do have a question from the audience. Do you feel a 15-minute increase in TV consumption is large enough for advertisers to pay attention to when you consider how many ad spots actually run in that shorter time frame?
Well, there's a couple things there. I think a 15-minute increase in regular TV consumption is just good to know, because the narrative out there is everyone's cut the cord. Nobody's watching regular TV anymore. And granted, this was during the height of the pandemic, but we will be reporting every quarter what happens across our huge data set. And if we see declines in some areas, you're going to see that. We're going to give our data out the full transparency. But I think it's mostly that to show that linear TV still works. It's still being used quite a bit. In terms of, I think the second part of that was about the ad load, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why video on demand and streaming services are kind of thriving today. And again, I'm not here to defend traditional TV or promote streaming. They're all working in different ways. And I think that's why, if you look at what Peacock is doing, what Hulu has done, experimenting with different models to say, okay, if I lighten the ad load, what does that do in terms of user satisfaction? If I make in video on demand, a lot of the ads you cannot fast forward. So that means, but it's still a lighter ad load than you would get in a linear environment. So smarter people than me kind of have those discussions about how to tinker with that. And I think it's part of the reason why there is a shift because of the user experience. But I think it's a great question.
Absolutely. And user experience, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation too, not just in the TV consumption, but also the navigating itself to, the show you want to watch. I won't even get started on HBO Max UX. It's the bane of my existence, but
it's a great point. I mean, that's the more systems you sign up for. And we literally say, well, where was that show again? Or, is that on Peacock or is it on Bravo on demand? I mean, these are the conversations we have in our house. Not a plug for Xfinity, but the voice remote, if you're an Xfinity subscriber, just helps you find the programming. Because I think they realized a long time ago, navigation to find the content is going to be the hardest thing with all the stuff that's out there now.
Oh, absolutely. And that was a great plug, because as soon as my kid can learn to talk, I think the first thing he'll want to do is talk into the remote and say, put on Sesame Street, because even that went from Hulu to HBO and it was a big to do.
My older son works for Klaviyo in Boston, a tech company. And when he got his first apartment out of Northeastern and he got the X1 box with the voice remote, he said, Dad, now I have a lot of hope for the future of Comcast, that you guys made this so cool. It's a good user interface after decades of cable interfaces not being that great. So the fact that a 20-year-old got it made me very encouraged as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of Comcast, one thing that for our clients and a lot of the conversations over the years we've had with Comcast is about live sports. So I know you touched on this a little, but you have Amazon entering the game now of streaming live sports. How are you guys managing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about the leagues, and again, this is above my pay grade, but if you think about the leagues have to be NFL, MLB, all these leagues, they have to be aware of what's happening with cable usage, with cord cutting, and they have to be open to other venues. Live sports has been a huge benefit for us. We look at the data, not just, again, Nielsen ratings on a tiny sample, but actual set-top box data after an event. And we say, wow, this still drives a huge audience. So it's kind of an open game. And it's part of the reason why, our chairman has said, we're going to be the aggregator of aggregators. We're going to bring, if you have an X1 box now, you've got Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, YouTube, all these competitors of ours kind of brought into our garden, because our walled garden, because we realize we're not going to control every single inventory stream forever, but the more they pull apart, the more we feel like we're better positioned, as opposed to like one broadcast station that can only give you inventory on that one, on the news, and with excessive frequency. We've got all these networks, we've got all these devices that we can knit together for you. And we try to make that complex idea as simple as we can for our clients, because it does get hairy sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be another question kind of outside of the topic, but just interesting and related. In light of COVID, watching sports has become so different, but it's also unlocked some very interesting opportunities for the consumer. How you see the different live faces on the NBA and whatnot. Where do you see live sports going in that way? What do you think will stick, and how do you think it'll change?
Well, I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a huge Boston sports fan, and we've all been spoiled, right? So, I mean, I think it's been a great experience. I think this has transformed a lot of things, and we talked about it at the last session that I spoke at. It has accelerated some trends that were happening. I personally like to go to one Patriots game a year, but being at home watching live sports is a superior experience, because you get all those camera angles and you just have a better view of things. So I think the sports programming has been going more and more as a TV setup for a long time. The teams that struggle with attendance, I can't speak for them, but it was a weird year here in that, baseball team struggled. The winter teams kind of rallied in the playoffs. We're going to have to get used to some kind of, cliche new normal next year as people come back. But people are going to be hesitant, I think, no matter what, to kind of jump back into stadiums and shout and cheer, I think, for a while now. So to me, it only underscores the power of TV live sports.
Definitely. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And going back to some of the things we were talking about in the beginning, you know, at least at AMP, we work with clients with all sorts of budgets and needs. So in this world, you know, what we always like to say is the old, we can outsmart versus outspend. So what's your advice to advertisers that might be more on the lower end, but they are a true challenger brand and trying to compete with the P&Gs and, you know, and the large brands of the world?
Well, we love this because, you know, we can, I live in Medway, Mass, right? So there's a 2 branch bank that's here that wants to reach 8 or 10 towns. And we have a geo-targeted solution for them across screens. So whether it's TV or digital TV, geo-targeting is right in our wheelhouse. But we also deal with the big guys, right? And the biggest furniture companies and the biggest auto dealers. And I think you're right. You got to be smarter. No matter what your spend is, you can't afford to waste it. So again, it's coming back to that data, first-party data insights, and utilizing that, and also kind of making sure that you're investing in quality, not just, hey, this company's got, you know, OTT for me at a $25 CPM or $20 CPM, and it's going to be as good as anything else I'd buy, because it's not kind of the case. It'd be like, understand what you're buying, so you're spending your money smartly. Look at real first-party data to get insights, and then geo-targeting, audience targeting. We've come, the industry and you and all of us have come so far in the last 5 years in terms of what we can do, what we can deliver at scale. So it's a really, there's great opportunities to help out clients of all size.
We agree at AMP. I know we only have about 5 or so minutes left, so I think I'll end with one from the audience, but a good one to tie a bow on things. Are there any other shifts related to streaming and OTT that you anticipate happening in 2021 and beyond?
You know what, I'm thrilled to talk about this topic, and I'm a student of it because I work in the game, but I think there's going to be more services. It's going to be based on, I'll go back to what you said, it's going to go back to the consumer experience. You know, whoever can aggregate the audiences, whoever can make it easy for the consumer, whoever can produce fresh live programming, you know, in the early part of next year, when we assume that there's been kind of this dearth of production. It's a very competitive space. I find it fascinating to watch. There'll be new devices invented by Christmas to watch TV on. So it's going to continue to pull apart. And I just ask people to kind of think about not like each single piece, but think about it in the aggregate, because we're only doing our job for our clients if we really assemble it in the aggregate. We don't have, hey, there's no silver bullet here. Like you have to pull a lot of things together to reach your audience. And so there's a lot there. I know I could probably ramble through that answer, but I don't see any one single change that's it's just a continuation of what we've seen over the last 2 years. I think it's just going to keep accelerating.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a constant evolution. I mean, what I find interesting is especially what happened this year with COVID times, but then also add what was already happening with, you know, data privacy and things like that. You almost see a kind of rewind in some trends as well, which is what makes, you know, you guys interesting with your roots in Comcast. You know, you still have that traditional mindset, but how it's going to continue to evolve with digital, which I think is great.
Yeah, the company's not fighting the trends. And I used to, before I came here, I worked for the Boston Globe, and I saw what the internet did to that company. And what I love about where we're at right now is Comcast is like, hey, whatever the consumer wants, we're going to try to serve. And if you just want our high-speed internet, we'll give you the flex box, and we'll embrace that as well. So it's an exciting time to keep going on this business.
Knowing who you are and owning it, right?
Exactly.
Great. Well, I think we just have a couple minutes left, so we'll give people time to take a quick break. So I think that's it for us. So I'll hand it over back to Luz, but hope you guys enjoyed the session. And Mike, thank you. This was really great.
Thank you. It was a great talk. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike and Andy. That was super enlightening. And as a consumer, I can definitely attest to the number of streaming options that are out there, especially during quarantine. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us into session 2. So for session 2, we have Jeff joining us, and Jeff is Executive Director of Deloitte Center for Technology, Media, and Telecommunications, or the TMT Center for short. Using original research and deep industry expertise, the TMT Center develops insights that reveal emerging trends so executives can anticipate change rather than react to it. Jeff holds a master's and PhD in political science from the University of Toronto and a bachelor's in political science from Ohio State University. Welcome, Jeff. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you, MITX, for inviting me today. And I really enjoyed Mike's presentation as well, and I think there are some common themes that are going to carry over. In just a moment, I'll have my screen up, and then we'll talk about digital media trends. Let me know when you can see it. Can everyone see the presentation? All right. So digital media trends, this is the 14th year that we've done it. So this is a venerable study for Deloitte. And throughout this 14 years, we have tracked the changes in consumer behavior around media, the devices that they prefer to watch media on, and just how that's evolved over time. And what we found this year is that there was a pretty rapid evolution or acceleration when COVID came. So in terms of our study, we normally do one set of surveys per year. So we, this year, just before COVID hit, we surveyed 2,100 US consumers from December to January. And we were just about to release our study in mid-March, and we thought, you know, this COVID thing might be pretty big. So we pressed pause on that, and we did another survey so we could have an understanding of the consumer before and after the impact of COVID. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, the before, the after, and what that is going to mean for the future. And a couple notes, all of our data is weighted back to the US Census, so this is a good view of the consumer as a whole. And in our survey, we start from the age of 14, so 14 to 23. So we get some of the younger consumers in there as well. And you'll see throughout our presentation, we do a lot of analysis based upon the 5 generations that you see here. Some behavior comes up earlier in the younger generations, and then some, such as streaming, has really evolved from a younger early adopter behavior to something that just about everybody does. And we'd like to follow those trends from their inception with younger and early adopters throughout the mass market. So one of our main themes this year is that consumers have a lot of subscriptions. Mike was talking about all the video subscriptions people have, but when you add in pay TV and streaming music and video games and audiobooks and digital magazines, the average household has 12 paid entertainment subscriptions, and that includes 3 paid streaming video services. And there is an age distribution here. The average is 12. We can see that millennials, who really kind of kicked off the subscription boom in a lot of ways, have the most with 17. And when we see how some of these are distributed, you can see overall, streaming video for the second year in our survey kind of eclipsed the traditional pay TV, by which we mean cable and satellite TV. But we can also see the growth of streaming music and gaming, especially when you move to these younger generations where streaming video is nearly ubiquitous and streaming music and gaming are a big part of the entertainment mix. Now, during the pandemic, when everyone was stuck at home and you had maybe new people entering the household, a lot of people added subscriptions as well. And in this graphic here, you can see in blue the percentage who added one of these services. This darker green is both added and canceled, and then just the lighter green is canceled. So you can see there's an awful lot of net additions when it comes to streaming video, streaming music, and gaming. In fact, 32% of consumers added at least one paid streaming video service since COVID-19 began. When we dug a little deeper into our respondent base, we realized that men have more subscriptions than women. In fact, before COVID, men had 14 subscriptions to 10 for women, and that those additions were in gaming, audiobooks, news, and magazine. And you can see that kind of continue throughout COVID, where we had more additions among men than we did among women. We can go into some of the detail on that later, but there were a couple things that really came out. One is that women during COVID, reported that they had less free time as they were taking care of children and others who were in the household. This is on average, and also were thriftier with their money. And so as we think about how media companies can reach women, those are a couple things to keep in mind as we move forward. But streaming video really took off during COVID, again, in one of those accelerations. So after COVID, there were 80% of households with at least one paid streaming video account, up from 73. And I think the biggest jump you can see here is with the boomers, from just over 50% to 69%. And we also ended up seeing the average number of subscriptions go from 3 streaming video subscriptions pre-COVID, if you had a subscription, to 4. And then you can see the averages here. For those who have a subscription, Gen Z have 5, millennials have 5, Gen X have 4. So that's a lot of subscriptions, a lot of money potentially to be paid, and a lot to manage. Now, what were subscribers drawn to with a streaming video service? In many cases, they were drawn to a broad range of shows and movies, right? Being able to watch a lot of things that you like, and then that new and original content that's so important in not only attracting but retaining subscribers. What we thought was interesting is that this free trial or discounted rate was pretty big. Nearly a quarter of subscribers said that this was one of the reasons that they chose their streaming service. And that's going to be, I think, big later on in our story. Because consumers are starting to take a look at all their subscriptions and think that there might be some room to trim. Even before the COVID pandemic, having a large number of subscriptions could be overwhelming to consumers. And we saw a correlation between having a lot of subscriptions and a desire to cut them. So, 24% of consumers overall say that they felt overwhelmed by all the subscriptions they have to manage on a monthly basis. And for millennials who have an average of 17, that was 40%. And then when we asked, about intents to reduce them, there was, again, a strong correlation between feeling overwhelmed and the desire to cut those in the future. And it's never a good thing when your best customers want to have fewer of your product or service than more of them. But I think that's what we're seeing, maybe too much of a good thing around paid entertainment subscriptions. When we take a look at streaming video subscriptions in particular, pre-COVID, the previous year, 20% of subscribers said that they cut at least one streaming service in the past 12 months, with millennials leading at 27%. And in the COVID world, we can't call it the post-COVID world yet, unfortunately, many consumers are starting to feel a bit cash-strapped. In our survey, 39% said that they had a decrease in household income since the COVID pandemic began. And that could be playing a role in why they're starting to cancel some streaming video services. So among those who canceled, the top reason for canceling a video was, before COVID, I finished watching the show or series that led me to subscribe in the first place. So maybe you wanted to watch a particular series, you watched it, and then you moved on. In second place was it was too expensive. Now we moved to post-COVID, or in the COVID era, and just within a couple of months, 17% of video streaming subscribers said that they had cut a streaming service during the pandemic. Now, at an annualized rate, maybe that will stay at 17%, but there's a good chance that that number could keep climbing up, and that's something that we're tracking. But this, I think, is what's most important. Post-COVID, since COVID, I should say, why did consumers cancel a service? This is where cost gets more important than content. 36% saying it was too expensive, 35% saying that the free trial or discount had ended. And we think about all of the streaming services right now that are on discounted or free trials. There's a possibility that there's going to be a subscription cliff when those end, and that a lot of those services are going to have a hard time retaining their customers. The other thing that we're talking about, and Mike discussed this as well, is the rise of ad-supported streaming. We found that since COVID, we moved from 40% of consumers saying they watch at least one free ad-supported video service to 47%, so nearly 50% now. And this, we're still talking about the free services, not ones that are defrayed by the cost of a subscription. So partial subscription, partial ads. We'll talk about that in a second. These are the free services. So they've really gained a lot of traction very quickly. And the reasons I think are very interesting. First of all, is the value proposition of free. Can't argue with that. But we're talking about ease of use and user experience earlier, and the fact that so many of these services are available through smart TVs and smart streaming devices makes it easy to discover and to start using the service. And in many cases, you don't have to use your credit card. You can just start watching right away. And then when they get there, they enjoy the broad range of shows and movies. And as a bonus, the ads are shorter. So we ended up doing a bit of a test. What do consumers really want when it comes to streaming? So we ended up asking a question saying, if there were a streaming video service that you knew you wanted, how would you prefer to get that service? It could be, no monthly subscription fee with 12 minutes of ads per hour, $6 of subscription, 6 minutes of ad per hour, or a $12 fee for no ads. And these are very similar to many of the offerings that we see in the market today. And what was really interesting is that we found that, before COVID, 62%, and since COVID, 65% prefer at least some ads with their video. And that's because they're getting either free entertainment, or the cost is being defrayed by watching ads. Whereas those who really want no ads is about 38 to 35%. And what's interesting about this is that there are so many subscription services chasing the consumer. By one count, over 300 of them that are using the subscription fee model with no ads, when the market's really showing us that there is a lot more room for ad-supported video. Then when we take a look at those who don't have streaming video yet, overwhelmingly they would prefer the free ad-only option. This ends up being a bit generational because consumers like what they know. So when we talk about no ads, this is what Gen Z and millennials kind of grew up with, the first generation to really have those subscription services. Whereas those who prefer ad only are the boomers and matures who grew up watching ads and may have even only had 3 channels to watch. Although I'm Gen X and dating myself a bit, I can remember those days too, right? Where you watched what was on and you watched ads. And many of the free services that we see are linear TV as well as being ad supported. But there's a limit to what consumers are willing to do, right? Consumers are willing to make an exchange of their time and their attention for entertainment, as long as they don't feel as if that exchange is unfair. So we ended up asking consumers, what amount of ads per hour is just right, and then what is too much where you want to stop watching. So we found that 7 minutes of ads per hour, customers say is just right. That's an exchange they're willing to make. When it gets to 14 minutes, they say that they want to quit watching and watch something else. They want to do another activity. And as Mike discussed earlier, some of the reason that consumers have gone to streaming video services is to avoid ads. But what we're finding is that there is a sweet spot, and many consumers are willing to watch ads as long as the ad load and the duration of the ad is not too long. So what kinds of ads do consumers pay attention to? overwhelmingly, they prefer ads that are shorter, under 10 seconds. And this is pretty consistent across the board, although the younger generations feel that way as well. And then about half say that they pay more attention if they can skip an ad. I'm sure we've all been there. You're looking for the countdown, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, at the same time, you're really paying attention and taking in that ad. Now, all this said, what we find in terms of influence around ads, online reviews remain very strong. Ads through social media platforms are big, search engine advertising. But then just below that is regular TV and then the streaming platforms. So, there's a big role for influencing the consumer through ads on streaming video services. Now, quickly, because I'd love to get to some questions, what are some of the new things that have changed since COVID-19? Well, we took a look at some things that consumers have done for the first time, and it was pretty interesting. So we had a list of things that we asked consumers about, and 38% said that they had tried a new digital activity since COVID-19 began. And the top couple were very interesting. One of them was to use a social network platform to watch TV or video with others, right? So co-watching alongside others when you're watching a TV show. And then the second one was watching a live streamed event, whether that was a concert or a video or a TV show. These are two of the newest ways that consumers found to pass their time during COVID. Another one we discovered is what's sometimes called, to add to all the VODs Mike was talking about, PVOD, or premium video on demand. There are various definitions for this, but it's basically a new movie release that goes directly to a streaming video service. 22% of consumers said that they watched one that was released, such as Trolls. 90% of those who did said that they would very likely to do it again. And again, the younger generations over-index here. And then finally, when we think about people's comfort level returning to some of the live venues, theme parks, concerts, sporting events, for many, they're not exactly sure when that's going to be. Many say 6 months, longer than 6 months, or don't know. This is something that ends up being pretty individual for some people, but I think in many cases, there's going to be a pretty extended time before the mass audience is going to come back to some of these. That, of course, is going to depend on the course of COVID and the course of treatments for it. But I think what we're seeing is that when it comes to movies and so forth, a lot of people are going to want to take in those new titles staying at home. And I think that is it for what I've got to share. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I'd love to take some questions. Are there any questions?
Hey there, Jeff, are you able to see me?
I can't. Yes, I can. Here we go. Hey, Daniel.
How's it going, Jeff? Thanks so much for this informative overview. I was looking forward to introducing you. However, Zoom wasn't cooperating. I'm sure nobody has had such an experience since all our time working remote and from home.
Never.
Never. All right, great. Well, good to see you here. Anyway, perhaps before we jump into some questions, just to quickly introduce myself, my name, for at least the folks here on the line, my name is Daniel Harrison. I'm the General Manager, US Sales at Hybrid Theory Global, and we're certainly proud sponsors here of the FutureX series. This session in particular was really interesting to me and certainly near and dear to my heart, because not a day goes by where across my team we're asked how to best identify who target audiences are on behalf of those clients, especially given how rapidly behaviors and interests are changing in this very uncertain environment. You've certainly spoken quite a bit to how media consumption particularly in the bigger screen and TV, has been changing. And I think many of those points are probably very helpful back to those media platforms, those broadcasters and streaming entities. Perhaps just to kick off the questions here, what are some of the discussions in terms of how you apply these insights into advising strategies for a media entity to make accommodation during this interesting and strange time period?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, when we talk to media companies, I think part of what we need to do is understand, the various parts, of their own strategy and what they have. Are they a studio that also has a streaming platform, for instance? And if that's the case, then releasing a movie in the theater versus releasing a movie on your streaming platform. How long the windowing is in these various areas. There are a lot of open questions that we try to help clients think through. And then there's also, when you think about how you're reaching different clients, the conventional wisdom until very recently was that you had to go with a streaming service that didn't have ads, because who wants to watch ads? Well, as it turns out, 65 to 68% of people want to watch ads, if that means that they can pay less. And so, when we think about the way streaming is going to evolve, it's going to be, I think, based upon multiple tiers. So there are going to be some people who are going to be willing to pay a premium to have no ads all the time. There are going to be others that are going to be willing to pay, not at all, and they're going to want, even if that means they've got fewer entertainment options. And there are going to be some people in the middle. And again, as the cost of content go up, whether it's live sports or episodes that can be $10 million to produce per episode, are we going to end up seeing more structured tiers where you've got to pay more to reach that? It's an open question, but I think that's some of what we're going to be seeing is new types of tiers, new types of ad-supported video. And you're already seeing that overseas in places like India and China.
That's an excellent point, and no doubt content costs, and so particularly premium content. And so seeing the transition from what was some of those early subscription-only environments to fast platforms, right? The free ad-supported streaming TV, which finally made way for advertisers to better reach those consumers of said content. It was interesting to see over the past 12 plus months, right? Fox acquired Tubi. I think it was 440 million in March. We had, what was it? Pluto by Viacom. Comcast acquired Zumo. I think Fubo was acquired as well. Quite a lot of moves from these, MVPDs and other more traditional broadcasters to acquire these ad-supported streaming options. Is there a role for standalone ad-supported streaming options beyond those that have already been rolled up? Are there going to be more services over time to come to meet that demand to reach a consumer in this way?
I think what we've seen thus far is, both in subscription-based models and as well and ad-supported, I think you're going to see a lot more market entrants to try to figure out, who can profit from this desire to have more content options, more free content options. And so I think you're going to end up seeing, more and more of these services crop up. As with subscriber-based video, it's who's going to be standing after consolidation happens, because, the market can't take 300 paid streaming services. We're going to see some consolidation. How many ad-supported ones will it be able to tolerate? We're not exactly sure. But what I do know is that because threshold is so much lower for this ad-supported streaming, it's just easier to get consumers to try it as long as they can discover it.
It's very interesting. And I think, to your point, one of those areas that that I certainly, as a consumer experience, and I'd be curious if others have seen this transition as well, is we've gone from what was traditionally channel surfing in the linear realm to app surfing, and so there's been that challenge of how to find that content that we want to watch at a given time without the fatigue associated with the search. And that's where it feels like with the ad-supported models that we've seen, there's an interesting marriage where they're taking or drawing inspiration from things that cable TV did well in terms of creating these interest-based called virtual linear channels that pre-stream for you a selection of things they think you'll likely want to consume without you having to search elsewhere for it, and then break out ad pods within that content in order to monetize the curation. Are you seeing that as an ongoing growth strategy for businesses? Will we see more of this?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how ads evolve in general on this platform. We've seen a lot of experimentation thus far with, ad duration, with the minutes per hour to make it a more attractive exchange again for the consumer, right? So I think we're just going to see more of that experimentation, and I think also to the degree to which these platforms can help advertisers zero in on exactly the type of consumer they want, there's going to be a lot of value in that.
Mm-hmm. I see a couple audience questions I wanted to make sure to get in here. One of them was, since men have more subscriptions, I imagine they tend to have more subscriptions, are advertisers targeting them more or adjusting their spend?
That's a good question, and I don't have specific data on that. When we wrote that piece, what we thought was interesting about it was, some of the underlying reasons why women said that they didn't have as many subscriptions or what that growth was. And they had to do with a lot of the things that we're seeing since COVID. Some researchers are calling this COVID a bit of a women's recession because they tend to have, be more likely to have lost a job. They're more likely to be caring for people in the household. And so part of what we were talking about is, for women who may have less money, may have less time, how do you compete effectively for their attention? And that could be through ad-supported offerings. And what was interesting when we looked at who was adopting ad-supported offerings, it was more men than women. So are there ways that some of these ad-supported services can end up, targeting women more effectively, so that even if women aren't willing to spend money on a subscription, they can still get attention and get some monetization. So that's the direction we went, although it is a really, really interesting question.
Yeah, that's very helpful thoughts on that. And there was another question from the audience here. As a part of the survey of about 2,000, what percentage of the Gen Z were ages 14 to 18?
I saw that, and that's a bit of a stumper. So I don't have the exact number. I'm guessing around 10%, but I'll have to go back in that. We do look at Gen Z from 14 all the way to 21, and we see a lot of similarities. But what that gives us the advantage to do with that 14 to 17 is sometimes we do see trends earlier. We see trends along the lines of gaming. Those who are interested in being in immersive gaming environments and so forth, right? So we end up seeing some of those trends earlier through that group than others.
Okay, very helpful. And just as we're going here, we have a few more minutes. I have some questions as well, but if anyone else has some questions, just a quick reminder that you could certainly drop them in the below box, and we'll make sure to ask Jeff and get his perspective on it. So one other question that I had for you was, as it relates to what consumers want, where you broke it out. I think it was ad only, some ads, no ads. And then you also broke it out in terms of the actual preference for the amount of time they're willing to trade, their attention they're willing to trade for the entertainment. I think the numbers I'm looking here, 66% pay more attention to ads under 10 seconds, and 48 pay attention to ads that they can skip. Are you seeing how this is impacting the amount of available ad inventory that these platforms are making available?
What I think is interesting about it is, when you think about the overall ad load per hour, if it needs to be, 7 minutes or less, right? You can think of it in terms of 30-second ads, or you can think of it in terms of, a bunch of 10-minute, 7 or 10-second ads, right? And so your inventory changes depending on how many of those ads you want to put in there. And so when we were talking about ad innovation before, I think we're going to end up seeing, more of these shorter and catchier ads in those shorter time periods, because there is less inventory if you're only putting 5 minutes out there, let's say. And then people do pay more attention to them if they're shorter.
Makes plenty
But
sense.
One thing that I think is just
Please.
interesting for the industry, and be interested to hear from the audience, is before, when all these streaming services were subscription only, it seemed as if advertisers were, if not shut out, there weren't as many options. And I'm wondering how the group feels about having now, some of these platforms have got 10 million, 20 million monthly active users. So you've got a lot of people out there. Is that a good thing for the advertising industry, and how is it being taken advantage of? It seems like now there's a way in when perhaps there wasn't as much one.
Well, I could certainly, I'm going to look to see if there's anyone from the audience that has a comment on it, because I'd much prefer to hear their perspective. So I'll wait and see. But in the meantime, I'll just share that certainly from my vantage point, being at Hybrid Theory, where we're taking on and managing many campaigns programmatically for brands and agencies, we've certainly seen that uptick in terms of a desire to not only reach individuals in a very transparent way, which was always a challenge even in digital for some time, but to do so across different screens and CTV and OTT. As this inventory opens up, those that were really waiting on the fence, that were much more conservative about the effort, are starting to wade in. And I think the COVID-19 time period, in line with the theme of this discussion, has absolutely pulled people over the fence, where they felt that this was perhaps the only way they could start to reach people in that very efficient fashion on the bigger screen.
Yeah, and I think as fewer people are watching traditional pay TV, and there are fewer of those really big events, right? Whether it's a sporting event or something that's bringing a huge mass of people, pay TV is still very good at that, right? So if you're scattered across these other streaming services, how are you making sure that you're reaching those people who are migrating over? But as Mike mentioned earlier, it's a bit scattered, the audience.
Well, it certainly is. It seems to be the forever circle of fragmentation and consolidation. And we're seeing both of those happening in tandem, nonstop. Perhaps one more question that I don't see yet from the audience, but I'll ask one, because this is certainly near and dear to me as we've been stuck in our home environments. Disney Plus had launched the live action Mulan, and had done this skipping the typical theatrical release cycle straight to streaming. But they did so differently than like a Hamilton or some of these others, and put straight forward a $30 fee. This is in a typically non-ad supported environment as well. Are you seeing any preliminary numbers around how successful that's been? Have you looked at anything as it relates to this particular example? It seemed like a first, or at least one of the early to try this out.
Well, as I mentioned in our in the walkthrough of the data, at least in May, we found that 22% of consumers had watched a PVOD, so video on demand release like that. So I think there is an appetite for it. We've got some new data coming out very soon where we're going to check that again. But again, I think studios are going to end up thinking through their distribution strategies a little differently moving forward. Right now, many people can't attend a movie in a theater, or they don't want to, and yet movies still need to come out. And so I think studios are going to start thinking about whether to send something directly to PVOD with a fee. Are you going to end up putting it maybe on your on your streaming site without a fee in order to have new and exclusive content, which really does drive, it drives adoption of your service, it drives retention. Are they going to distribute it on other services? So I think there are a whole host of questions that studios are just going to start thinking their way through, especially again if they own their own streaming platform, because they've got to consider, what's going to be good for the platform and driving adoption and retention as a whole versus the box office. So a lot of questions to think through.
Well, I certainly remember sitting down with my girls, and they're seeing that this was available, and so ensued a conversation around, that does seem a little bit much, even though they'd be glad to spend anything for Mulan. But even they, when I asked them the thought question of, well, how would you watch advertising in exchange, and how much would be appropriate, and how personalized, like what content would you watch? And immediately they went into the concept of, right, just driving tune-in to watch another 2 or 3 30-minute trailers for other videos. That would have been easy for them to watch in order to translate into them paying the fee or not paying the fee, to watching the program. And
one interesting hurdle, I think, is going to be, you see that $20 or $30 fee and you equate it to a single ticket. Well, if you are with your family, that's not the exchange you're making there, right? And so, I think maybe consumers have a little ways to go to understand, like, what's the trade-off they're making? Is it better value or not?
Well, we were certainly stuck there doing finger math for how many people were in the audience. Well, look, we're just about at time here, Jeff. I'll say also on behalf of myself, who's very much focused with hybrid theory on solving many of the challenges to find individuals as their behaviors and their interests change everywhere across different forms of media, especially in OTT and in video. This has been a very insightful conversation, and really appreciate your analysis today.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and thanks everyone for having me. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to Jeff and Daniel for that presentation. I think our industries and many others are still learning the ways to navigate COVID and the consumer. So that definitely leads us into our discussion with our team today. So I'm just going to introduce us before we get started. So I'm Liz. I am a comms planning lead at Media Hub. And I have the honor of introducing our team that will be speaking with you all today. So first, we're joined by Armin Malavi, who leads his own consulting firm, helping agencies and brands like Hilton and Mattress Firm. I also have Anjali with us. She is a senior analyst at Forrester, working really closely with CMOs to apply new research and consumer insights, and really using tech as a way to guide our brands. So with that, just a really quick intro, but want to get started. So we've all been talking a lot about COVID-19, right? It's changing the way that people are behaving forever, leaving brands and people to really collectively say, like, okay, what do I do now? And we've talked a lot about this today already, right? Women are losing jobs, behaviors are changing in media, people are streaming. On top of that, we see, so many people are grieving, racial injustice is at our forefront. It's very easy for companies to really focus on business, even with all of this upheaval. And I think what we're really excited about is that the three of us really put people at the heart of everything that we do. So really thinking about how to solve problems by understanding how people are really thinking about today. And so what we're here to talk about is really the dimension of well-being, kind of like new changing tech and how that's really shaping new behaviors and how we want to think about marketing in the future. So I'm going to kick it to Anjali, who's going to talk a little bit about the insights she's been seeing from a sentiment perspective among consumers.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. And thanks to everyone for joining the session today. It's really wonderful to be here and with such a great opportunity to talk with both Armin and Liz in the preparation for all of this. Yes, exactly as you mentioned, Liz, I really like how you focus on this idea of the human factor, because there's nothing quite like a crisis to make us all sort of remember our own humanity, and realize that, we are consumers. We are also the ones that are, trying to develop empathy for the consumer and translate that into what we do at work. And so we've really embraced this sort of mindset at Forrester Research in our data collection efforts and research efforts as we tried to understand, what is changing in the consumer's world, this year. How are people sort of reconfiguring their lifestyles? How are they creating new relationships with brands? What do they expect from brands as they work through crisis mode and now move into 2021? And so one of the research methodologies that we have been applying at Forrester over the course of the year is our own sort of proprietary framework that measures consumer emotion. And specifically, we wanted to understand what is the exact measurable sort of emotional toll that the COVID-19 pandemic and other associated crises, what is the toll that all of this is taking on consumers? And we use this sort of index that we've developed internally at our company, because we're not just looking at sentiment, right? How sort of positively or negatively are consumers feeling in a certain time. We're also not just looking at a broad range of all sorts of emotions. I think we all know from our own experience that this has certainly been an emotional roller coaster of a year. And from a marketing standpoint, measuring the fluctuation in different emotions isn't necessarily the most useful when it comes to figuring out what to say to consumers. So we instead looked at 4 specific emotional dimensions that we know from our research over the years are the 4 sort of most powerful emotional dimensions that drive consumers towards a brand or away from a brand. So these are the emotions that make consumers ready to try out a new product or service offering. These are the emotions that make consumers receptive to a new message or campaign that you're launching. And so those are the 4 sort of emotional dimensions that we've been keying into. And what we found is that generally speaking, consumers have been dropping on all of these emotions. So they've sort of been losing this like emotional energy around the 4 dimensions. And it's, precipitously just dropped to new lows over the course of the year as the pandemic, set in as a reality. The biggest changes were among the emotion that we consider to be sort of identity versus isolation. So we saw that consumers moved from a place where they felt, connected to a community, to a certain group, down the scale towards isolation. Which is not surprising, right? We all were physically and continue to physically, socially distance. But what this means is that has taken a real toll on consumers' emotional distancing as well. Consumers are feeling more isolated, fragmented, disconnected from the groups that they typically affiliate with and are withdrawing into their own worlds. Consumers dropped down the scale of feeling trustworthy or willing to trust. Consumers have started feeling more skeptical about brands and organizations and their ability to follow through on their promises, their ability to sort of do what they say they're going to do. And consumers have started feeling more sort of vulnerable, right? They feel like they have less control over their circumstances. One of the really interesting insights that we gleaned from this research is some of the data that didn't change, which is one of these 4 emotional dimensions, which is tracking novelty, and specifically consumers' eagerness to learn something new and take an adventure and be entertained. So we found that consumers' energy around this sense of novelty, fluctuated mildly, but really overall didn't change from, from what we were detecting in these studies before the pandemic, became a reality. So what this means is that consumers today, in this moment, have just as much of an appetite for novelty and variety and innovation as they did this time last year, and this time 2 years ago. So that was an interesting sort of emotional insight that we detected from all of this, and it kind of wraps into a larger theme that I'll just mention very briefly, which is that we've been seeing that consumers are becoming more willing to experiment with new brands and products and services over time, and this is something that was in motion even before the pandemic had entered the picture. So 10 years ago, in 2010, something like 39% of US online consumers were always willing to do or try new things, try out new brands. Today, 56% of consumers agree with that, which is a significant shift in the data. And what this data point around novelty means that I was just talking about is that consumers are going to continue in this direction with this sort of desire for discovery and appetite for novelty. So it's interesting to consider sort of, what are the emotions that have changed in the context of the pandemic, and what are some of the discrete trends that are in fact not changing because of the pandemic or are being accelerated because of the current condition.
I think, what's to add to what Anjali is sharing, I think there's a couple really interesting pieces to play off of. So first of all, Anjali talked about the loss of connection to people, right? And then you think about the loss of control. I don't know what's going on around me, right? I don't know what's happening next. So when you think about loss, the question becomes, how do people react to loss, right? And the way you generally react to loss is, how do you fill that gap? And I think I see two interesting trends coming out of that. I think the loss of connectivity to people, I think, has forced people to really reevaluate the circle of their worlds, right? What about my local town? What about the, quote, main street in my town? I think that, all of a sudden the running store that is in your neighborhood that you may or may not have been buying shoes from, you start to realize very quickly that they provided so much more value to you, be above and beyond just selling you sneakers, selling you running shoes. They provided a running community, they provided guidance. And those are things that consumers aren't necessarily getting from Amazon. They're not necessarily getting, from, other online retailers. And so I think they're starting to reevaluate the value chain of all of their commercial decisions, right? Do I get more out of buying these shoes from my local running store versus from buying them from Zappos? And I think people are spending more time thinking about all of those decisions, thinking about the supply chain, because they're starting to realize that the town they love, the neighborhood they love, right, is built from a wide fabric of things that and entities that they appreciated before the pandemic, but now that they can't leave their home as much, they can't go out to dinner as much, there's a loss there. And so they're starting to feel that loss in new ways. I think the other way that we're seeing a lot of this change behavior is, people are starting to realize that whether it's Uber Eats or Grubhub, doing delivery for restaurants, they are taking a very healthy chunk of the revenue away from restaurants. There's rumors and reports that, an Uber Eats order, 20 to 30% of the revenue from that meal is going to Uber, right? And so what that means is it's not going to your local restaurant. And so now you really have to start thinking like, yes, it is obviously way more convenient to order from, Chinese takeout from Uber Eats, but that local shop, that local restaurant, is making a much less profitable sale. And services like Uber, Uber Eats, Instacart, whatnot, are extracting value out of the value chain. Obviously, it's in return to, in support of a service to you, the consumer. But I think people really are starting to think through, is it really worth the extra 5 minutes that I'm saving by doing Uber Eats to, go and just call them directly so that they can make as much as they could and support my local.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that just briefly and mention, it reminds me, in some of the recent research we've done, we found that I think 36% of consumers in the US are saying that they spend more time thinking about how they can contribute to their local community now, right, as a direct result of the pandemic. And something like 39% of US consumers are saying that in the future, so say the next 12 to 24 months, they will go out of their way to make sure that they're doing business with brands that play a positive role in the local community, and specifically that show that they care for their people, for their employees. Some other research I was reading recently shows that a brand's sort of corporate citizenship is most highly correlated now with the employee experience. And so, a brand can signal being a really good corporate citizen by showing how it's taking care of its people. So I completely agree with you and see that is reflected in a lot of the consumer data as well, that people have this newfound sort of, consciousness to the local brands and the local stores, and, that it really matters, where they spend their money, right? Where they're putting their money is essentially voting with their wallet. And I think that's become a reality for them.
I think one thing too that's interesting is the idea of expectation of brands. So for a long time, brands' expectations have really been rising among consumers. One of the things that we found in some research that we looked at over the course of the past 6 months is just expectations for brands, especially in this moment. And consumers really believe that brands have a responsibility here to bring people together in a very divisive society, to support employees, to kind of go to that next level to repair and rebuild the way that they want to see things right now. One of the things we've been looking a lot at is the idea of lost moments for consumers. So we know that, a lot of like weddings were planned for this year, high school graduations, family vacations, a lot of these heightened moments that maybe only happen once. And we've been finding that consumers have really taken on to themselves to start to recreate some of these. So some of the trends that we're seeing might be, a wedding in Minecraft, or AOC's even just pledged to vote on Twitch on Wednesday, driving like record numbers. And so for a lot of people, they're kind of taking this like newfound space to recreate moments that they might have experienced. And they're expecting that brands are kind of following them on this path. And so one of the things from a trend perspective that we think is really exciting for brands is to think about how can you help consumers kind of make up for these lost moments as they look to new places, especially digitally and most heavily within like new spaces and media, to recreate those, to find them, to kind of show them more support and help them kind of just, deal and cope with every day that is more inside.
Yeah, I really like that point. And I like that, what that means for the marketer is that you have to look at your consumer more holistically, or you have to kind of widen the aperture of your view into the consumer, so that you're not just thinking about your product or the channels that you're already using to reach your customer, or looking at the market through the lens of your planned campaigns, but instead you sort of start with out of all of the sort of touch points that I have available to me to reach the consumer, where can I begin to have these conversations, or like you're saying, deliver these moments of serendipity and spontaneity and delight to create new value for consumers. So I think that's why you see, you know, brands like Walmart, for example, that had started using their parking lot spaces for like drive-in movie theater, you know, as drive-in movie theaters during this pandemic, you know, obviously with social distance measures in place and everything, but like that is something that you wouldn't have necessarily, you know, found as a possibility if you were kind of looking at the plans that you have in place. It really requires a customer first, you know, view and broader thinking.
Which is why I think that customer first view is why I love the Walmart execution, right? They are still thinking about their consumers. They're realizing a pain point that they're having, which is they're bored, they're feeling like their life is monotonous. They want to give them some kind of unique experience or some kind of value. And to get to the idea of movie theaters, I would imagine someone sat down and said, what is the unique asset that we Walmart have, which is clearly the real estate of their parking lots, right? No one else in America had that kind of real estate. And so to be able to, you know, look at their consumers and say, right, we know you can't come in. We know you may not want to come in, but we still want to be able to provide value to you in a way that really Walmart can only do is just such a phenomenal stroke of thinking and stroke of true, you know, appreciation of consumer insight. And, you know, it also goes to the notion of, you know, yes, there are so many unknowns right now, right? We have the election. We don't know what's going on with the second wave, what's going on with the, you know, vaccine. You know, it's very easy to sit there and point at unknowns. I think that if we spend more time as advertisers, as marketers, looking at what we still know to be true, because yes, this has been a huge upheaval, but people still, you know, want to consume, people still want to do things, they want to go running, they, you know, so all of their habits, all of their consumer needs are still there. They may be tweaked. The way they want to consume them or getting access to them has been tweaked. But if you start with what we know, right? And, you know, I think when marketers really identify the known constants and then say, okay, these are the parts that we don't know, and try to figure out how can we learn more? Is it the sentiment tracker from Forrester? Is it talking to consumers? I think now more than ever, this is the best time ever to be doing consumer research, talking to guests, you know, talking to your target audiences to really understand what is happening in their minds. You know, and unfortunately, what I'm seeing, you know, I have a fun seat in that I get to talk to a lot of different companies. I see a very, you know, interesting split. I see companies who are retracting as many loose dollars as they can to shore up their books. And, you know, Anjali knows this probably better than anyone. Research tends to be one of the places that gets cut. You know, and unfortunately, that's quite frankly the wrong thing to be doing right now. You know, we need to make sure that we know as much about the consumer right now and what's changing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you know, I was going to say at Forrester we are sort of talking about how this is kind of the golden age of research. It's, you know, the conversation that you know, our CEO is certainly, you know, repeating as a refrain within the company, and I think this point around how it's actually becoming more urgent to stay clued into how consumers are changing and where they're going next is really important. And it also means that there has to be more sort of, I would say, urgency or commitment to test and learn type scenarios. So, you know, we've been talking about here, and you've heard in the previous sessions, that consumers are changing so rapidly, right? There's so much change going on. Consumers can't even process it entirely themselves, right? So survey data is, of course, important, powerful, but it on its own is not going to tell you the entire story. You know, demographic characteristics are important, but are not going to explain the whole story. That's why we've layered in this new kind of emotional tracker that I was talking about at Forrester. the ability to rapidly reinvent your own understanding of the consumer and sort of, offer some sort of new solutions, right? Trial them out and capture data incredibly quickly and then iterate, right? It is so much more important today than it has been before, because there's still this lingering question of like, which consumer behavior changes are going to last after the pandemic? Are we, staying home and working from home and, ordering delivery and, taking the time to, take the less convenient option and do something good for the community because it's a function of this particular moment? And what does that mean for, 12, 18, 24 months down the line when things inevitably change again? Are consumers going to revert back to some of their pre-pandemic behaviors and do old habits die hard? And even the person with the best intention is going to eventually slip into the mode of delivery that's most convenient. So because those questions are still out there, constant sort of rapid fire insight generation and analysis and a focus on emotion, I think, is becoming even more important at this moment.
I think we will come out of this better. I realize that there is a huge impact that this is having on the world, and I don't want to sound callous, because clearly millions of people around the world have been wildly impacted by this. But do I think I'm going to be baking bread every Sunday, after this is all over? Probably not. But I will bake a little bit more. I do think, people will, come out smarter. I think when you look back at the mortgage crisis, right, and you look at that boom, the notion of conspicuous consumption was frowned upon quite dramatically. And I think I had the pleasure of LVMH back then. The design structure, went away. The product design structure changed. People went more towards, experiences as opposed to conspicuous consumption. I think do it for the gram definitely benefited from that. So, I have always said that marketing is about optimism, right? And, to be in advertising is inherently optimistic. So I have optimism for the future, for people coming out better.
So we have one question that somebody wrote. So who has done the best transformation from retail operation to community connection? Calling out the Walmart movie theater example being really great. I can share one. I'm a little biased because I work on it. But I will share anyway. But one brand that comes to mind, I would say, is Chipotle. So Chipotle is a client of ours, and they are just totally crushing it. So in the mid-March timeframe, when all of their restaurants closed, they immediately shifted to delivery across all of their stores, and then fully shifted to new community connections. So in the first week of being home, they launched a mini effort called Chipotle Together, which, with the rise of Zoom and people, which now feels like our everyday, but at the time, Zoom, it was like in the first days of it, the focus was kind of like lunchtime Zooms and bringing people together in those moments and delivering Chipotle for free in those times. So that was within like the first few days of quarantine when it began. So just an immediate shift. And when you think of a restaurant, a brand that has over 1,000 kind of restaurants open, fully changing, it's such a massive kind of thing to do. And since then, they've just been laser focused, listening to their community and what they're looking for. And some of that comes from their social feeds. Some of that comes from just listening to followers on TikTok. I'll give another example. When students went back to school this fall, so there was a handful of different like posts that we were seeing from people saying that their cafeteria food that was being delivered to their dorm rooms were just so bad, and like they didn't want to eat that. And so we kind of saw all this popping up, and so we sent them all free Chipotle to have on campus while they were there, just so they could have something that was a little bit more tasty. And so I think those are just like a couple of examples of just like listening to people and what those unmet needs are to be more focused and more empathetic to the experiences that people are feeling right now, and really shifting to kind of support them in these times.
My favorite is Equinox. I think for those of you who don't know, Equinox, they built completely outdoor gyms I think they launched the first one in LA. The second one is in New York. They even branded it. It's Equinox in the Wild. It's so well done. You know, when you think about how do you execute a high-end experience, right? Because remember, Equinox members are paying a lot for those gym memberships, you know, anywhere 8 times what, you know, Planet Fitness is charging. You know, they're looking for a premium experience, and to pull off a truly outdoor gym that is CDC compliant, that is, you know, high end. And when you see it, and, you know, and I've been a member of Equinox for, you know, a long time here in Boston. It's so perfectly on brand, the way they executed it. They've done a phenomenal job. And I hope that they keep the gyms open after COVID is over, because working out in the sunshine is amazing for anyone who's ever been to LA.
Yeah, those are great examples, and I think I'll just maybe add one that perhaps could kind of complement these. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said even for you know, how you create a sense of community through content and through creative, right, and through messaging. So one of my favorite examples comes from some of the Spanish banks that were, you know, realizing that consumers that were tech, you know, in the past sort of tech laggards or kind of the resistors are now having to bank online for the first time. So a variety of banks like BBVA and others created these sort of videos that were called, you know, by the elderly for the elderly, which had some of their like slightly older consumers, you know, walk through the steps to, you know, setting up an account online or transferring money and paying bills online. And, you know, obviously for other consumers that were apprehensive about that whole experience, and the videos included, you know, not just how-tos, but also tips on you know, what to do to make sure your data is staying safe, right? How can you be sure that this is, you know, you're making the right decision? So it offered that sense of guidance and virtually facilitated this sense of community among consumers, even though they were, you know, doing things online, perhaps by themselves, right, at home for the first time.
Okay, so we also have another question in the chat. How do you think companies or brands should deal with Zoom fatigue? Are there other ways that people can connect that brands should focus on during the pandemic?
You know, I would actually broaden it a little bit. I would broaden it to just fatigue in general. You know, and I think that, you know, it was so, this phrase is so overused, but really surprise and delight. You know, I think that you'd be surprised, right? Like people are checking, they're reading their direct mail. People are, you know, checking their emails more often. They are engaging with media in ways that they weren't doing 18 months ago. And I think that, you know, this is the time to throw out the playbook that you had from pre-COVID, you know, truly whiteboard ideas on how to engage people differently. I think that people, you know, you can look at what happened with Ocean Spray on TikTok 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? You have to look for that little bit of magic. You have to look for what consumers are doing online and, you know, just trying. I think, you know, Anjali made the point earlier of just test and learn. You know, I think right now, as long as you are socially courteous about the idea of COVID, right? I think consumers are very forgiving right now. And so, you know, really trying to think through just new ways to connect and really just appreciate the fatigue that people are feeling is the way to win.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I just want to quickly add another point, which is, when you start thinking into the future, so if we were to assume that there is some form of a vaccine, at some point in 2021, or some version of treatment, I, based on the data, strongly believe that there is a significant segment of consumers that has a lot of pent up energy that will be quick to engage in physical spaces again, right? Talk to other real people, browse brick and mortar stores. Something like 24% of US online adults today sort of fall into this category where they're not really that afraid for their physical health. They're not really feeling the grips of the financial, uncertainty at this particular time. So because they've been kind of buffered by the shocks of this crisis this year, this has really just been a very long, as we said, monotonous, dreary time. And they are going to spend their money in physical places to try and kind of make up for the experience that they've been deprived of this year. So I do think that, rethinking the value of the brick and mortar space is also important to do. And some of the brands, especially some of the D2C disruptors, the direct to consumer brands that have launched in the past 5-7 years or so, are really good examples of companies that use their brick and mortar space to create that sense of community. And Armin, like you're saying, that surprise and delight in a very physical, tangible way, even though all of the transactions will happen virtually, right, or digitally. So that model is one to certainly look at if you haven't, dug into that as yet.
I'll give another example too on, this was one of my favorites, I think, that I've seen just in terms of like brands that are kind of like shifting focus a little bit. Headspace, when unemployment was extremely low when it first started in like April, May time period, they offered their app free to unemployed Americans. And I just thought it was a really good example of a brand giving away its platform to a totally different audience, as Anjali said, like outside of demographic, outside of maybe their core user, not looking at people who love meditation or maybe, are looking for mindfulness, but people who really need it, and honoring the experience that they're going through and cultivating and creating an entirely new community that maybe they didn't speak to or focus on or honor or support before that moment. So that's kind of been just one of my favorites that I think brought community together in a really wonderful way. Okay, we have another question. So do you have an example of a brand or industry that has changed their target demographics as a result of the pandemic?
I think travel, if you actually look at the travel industry, I think it's really interesting. Obviously I came from Hilton, so it's one that I look at more, but the interesting thing now is, and Anjali talked about this a little bit, right? The audiences that aren't impacted as much by COVID, whether it's physically or economically, and combine that with, I don't have kids who are not being homeschooled, right? So you're talking like 20s and 30s, right? Like childless people, they're having a really great time with travel. They are going on trips, they are going on short haul flights. They are upgrading their travel experiences, which I think is a really interesting dynamic there. But I think what's interesting on the family travel, it has completely pivoted to road trip. And I think all of the cottage industries around road trip has changed. I think, trying to inspire people to, travel short in a controlled way that they feel safe is something that the travel industry is going to start pushing for. And when you think about most of the major hotel chains who rely on 60 to 70% of their guests being fly to, it's a big pivot, for them. And obviously going after the staycation people, is also a big plus. I love this idea of hotels telling families to fly down to Miami. We will help your kids Zoom during the day in the conference rooms. I think there's a hotel in Miami right now that if you fly down there with your kids, you take your kids to a giant conference room, they can sit there and Zoom when they're supposed to be Zooming. And when remote school is over, they're at a resort. So clearly that is a new operating model for a hotel. But I think it's an interesting way to rethink the value prop.
I just realized that we are over our time. So I'm going to thank both Armin and Anjali for this awesome kind of chat, and everyone here for joining us for this discussion. So I'm going to pass it over to Luz to close the event and transition everyone into breakout rooms.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much. I really learned a lot today from all of these sessions, so I really appreciate everyone joining us. And a special thank you to our sponsors, Adherent, Effective, Hybrid Theory, and InMarket, and all of our wonderful speakers. So now I'm excited to transition us into networking. It's almost 5 o'clock, so hopefully we can relax a little and get to know each other. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a tab for networking rooms, and there are 2 options. So you can go between both to meet some different people. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you everybody for joining.